Congresswoman Val Hoyle joining us in studio. We appreciate you coming in. Congresswoman, you've been on a recess for a couple weeks, a little earlier than expected for that recess. Yes. What's the first order of business when you get back to Washington in September? Excuse me.
Well, we're going to have to vote because the continuing resolution is up. So we're going to have to take another vote to ensure that government doesn't shut down.
Obviously, one of the reasons that recess was a little earlier than anticipated was, Democrats were pushing the release of the Epstein files. Do you expect that to be back on the table in September?
Absolutely. The Oversight Committee, with support from 3 Republicans and the Democrats under Ranking Member Robert Garcia out of California, they put out a subpoena for the Epstein files. I don't personally think that it should be partisan to want to know and hold accountable people who rape children. That should be bipartisan. Everyone should want to know who is on that list. And the fact that the Epstein files have been kept secret for so long after Pam Bondi said she had them right on her desk, really, and with Ghislaine Maxwell being sent to a low security prison, what it means is people are not going to be able to trust what comes out. I mean, I can't remember if it was the Times or the Wall Street Journal said that FBI agents had been tasked with taking out any references to Donald Trump. Again, I don't care if it's a Democrat or a Republican. We should all agree as Americans that people who rape children should be held accountable and should not be in positions of power.
What would you think about President Trump potentially pardoning Ghislaine Maxwell?
I think it looks bad. Why would you knowingly pardon a woman who sexually trafficked minors to be raped by men who had money and power? She admitted to that. She is guilty of that. Why would he pardon her? The only thing that any reasonable person, the only conclusion any reasonable person can come to is that he is implicated and he doesn't want her to say anything. There is no reason we should hold people accountable for heinous crimes that hurt children.
I want to ask about the economy. Recent job numbers were not very promising, and inflation is still pretty high. Obviously, President Trump went ahead and removed the head of the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. Of course, you were former commissioner of the state Bureau of Labor and Industries. Trump was complaining about the way that they were gathering the statistics and the way they were revising them. Do you think there is validity to concerns about the economy and the fact that I know some people are even saying we could be heading for a recession?
So my background, I had a 25-year background in the sporting goods industry, in the bicycle industry, and in international trade. The tariffs and that Trump has, and the erratic nature that he's thrown tariffs on all these different countries, are impacting American goods and the cost of goods. They're hurting our ability to sell to other countries as they look for other trading partners, and they're making things more expensive when we're bringing parts over from other countries. So we're feeling that. We're feeling the hit on our market. I mean, Oregon wines are not being sold in Canada anymore. That was 40% of our international sales of Oregon wine. So I guess the message there is drink more Oregon wine. But also, this is happening across the country. Small businesses are being hurt, and we are paying for tariffs. Those costs get passed on to consumers. It is a tax for consumers. So, and also firing all these federal workers, especially in rural communities, there are less jobs. If you can't handle the truth, when you fire the person who has been there and given the same information for Democrats or Republicans, because you don't like the answer, then we as Americans can't trust the information that's coming out. And again, I think that it is incumbent upon the president, the buck stops here. incumbent upon the president to look at reality, because how can we fix a problem like inflation or a recession or a decrease in jobs if we have a president and an administration that is afraid to look at facts?
The Trump administration has also tried to pull, they've been working to pull some money from disaster mitigation funds in Oregon. That's money that could go towards projects like fire-resistant builds, also climate research. Right now it's held up in the courts, but should Oregonians worry about federal support in the case of natural disasters?
Absolutely. Now, we did just get money, some disaster relief money for Southern Oregon for the floods, but what we haven't gotten is the individual relief. I asked the new FEMA secretary, acting FEMA secretary, what about the grants that Congress allocated? And again, that's our job. We have the power of the purse. That had been allocated for infrastructure, these resilient and infrastructure grants. There's one in particular in Port Orford that is for water and sewer infrastructure. We really need it. We were counting on it. Congress allocated it in a bipartisan way. And he said, well, these types of grants, they're called BRIC grants, need to be canceled because they're being spent on woke things and bike paths and bus stops. And I said, look, water and sewer infrastructure in Port Orford, in Curry County, a rural county, that's not DEI. That's not a bus stop. That's something that's absolutely critical, and our taxpayer dollars should be able to come back to fix these things. I do worry when I look at Maryland and I look at other states that have had disasters. The president has now decided that they are going to reward states that voted for him and not reward states that voted for Kamala Harris in disaster relief. This is something that had previously been bipartisan. They want to destroy FEMA, saying the state should take on these roles. There are things that the federal government can do and come in and give us the expertise and support. That's why FEMA is so critical. Do we need to make FEMA more efficient and less bureaucratic? Absolutely. I'm on board with that. I will work on that with anyone all day long. But destroying it puts us in a very precarious position, especially when we look at wildfires, floods, or God forbid, the big one, the earthquake, the Cascadia earthquake that we know is coming at some point.
You said, that in some cases, they're rewarding states that voted for him and maybe penalizing states that did not. But have you seen that in your experience in working with FEMA and this administration? Have you seen a resistance to funds for the state of Oregon, which obviously did vote for Kamala Harris?
Yes.
And you feel like they aren't responding to your requests?
Here's the thing. We get a no, we get things canceled. Things are really important to Oregon. For instance, in the, big, beautiful bill, they took out the ability for counties to receive timber receipts when federal lands cut timber. That's very critical, right? And then there are grants that have already been allocated. I have been successful in some instances coming up and explaining, for instance, this grant in Port Orford, in Curry County, is for this reason, and fighting things on a piece-by-piece basis, also partnering with Republicans who are able to come in and make the case that where we have similar types of grants in districts that one Republican, one Democrat. So we've been successful in some ways. We've been successful when the courts overturn things saying you actually can't hold back these funds. But it's a different fight than we've had. Normally, the executive branch, the president, respects the separation of powers that were outlined in the Constitution, for Congress to be the check, the balance, the power of the purse, the executive branch, to enforce the laws, us to interpret them, and then the judiciary to interpret them. But this executive branch and this president just is blowing things up, saying I should have an imperial presidency and not have to pay attention to the pesky Constitution. This isn't partisan. This is just wrong.
It's been about 6.5 months of this presidency, and I remember when, even before President Trump was inaugurated, but after he had been elected, you had said that I will work with the administration where we agree and where it benefits Oregon. And I remember, of course, at the beginning you had joined was the Doge Caucus. You always forget caucus committee, but Doge Caucus. And then, of course, left that. And at the time you said, I want to be in the room.
Yes.
I want to be in the room. What's changed?
So I still am in the room. We're working very closely with Sean Duffy and the Department of Transportation on grants for the Port of Coos Bay. The Transportation Infrastructure Committee, the most functional committee in Congress. We're still working on things in a bipartisan way. Yes, Republicans are in control, but it's functional as the way it's meant to, because infrastructure should not be partisan. Bridges are not partisan. I've also been working with Senator Sheehy out of Montana in talking to Interior Secretary Doug Burgum about wildfire response. As they are saying they want wildfire response to be in one agency, I want to make sure that they're taking into consideration, we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And so when we started having fires, Senator Sheehy texted me and said, hey, are you okay? How are things going in Oregon? Because he had a wildland firefighting company and he fought fires here in Oregon. And so these are the things that you don't hear about. So day to day, we are working on things. We're working to get a bipartisan tribal co-management of public lands bill. That's a big deal, and a big deal for our tribes, and a big deal to make sure our federal lands keep in public hands. So we're working on things, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to call out what's not constitutional, sort of like a both-and situation, bit of cognitive dissonance. But there are still bipartisan things that are happening, but that doesn't mean that I'll stay quiet about what I see as undermining the basic tenets of our democracy.
Not a lot of bipartisanship in Texas right now. In Texas, of course, state Democrats have left the state to avoid a quorum, to avoid voting on redistricting of that state, which would potentially add 5 more red seats to the U.S. Congress. Do you support Democrat-led states responding, like California saying, well, then we'll redraw our maps? New York has a little bit of a tougher time doing it, but saying we'll redraw our maps, or Maryland. Do you support Democrat states sort of having that counter action?
So first, I'll take a step back and say, I think the worst thing that happened for our democracy was overturning Citizens United and having unlimited money in politics. The second thing is partisan redistricting. I believe we should have nonpartisan redistricting across the country. My district, you can't get elected with just Democrats or Republicans. 42% of this district, of the voters in this district, aren't Democrat or Republican. If we had more districts like mine, we would be able to solve problems better. What Texas is doing, and it looks like potentially Florida is doing, what Ohio is definitely doing, what North Carolina did last year to try and pick up 4 seats, they are redistricting specifically for partisan gain, with the support and encouragement of the President of the United States, because they know that the things that they're passing are unpopular, and we will pick up the House if elections are fair. There was just a special election in Rhode Island. Democrats overperformed by 50 points. That's not a small thing. Now, having said that, we should have nonpartisan redistricting throughout, and that would solve a lot of problems. If Republicans are going to redistrict for partisan gain, Democrats have to do the same thing. We have to save our democracy. This is, I think, one of the worst things for democracy, but you can't bring a plastic spork to a gunfight. And we can no longer say, well, we're going to operate in this way, in a nonpartisan way, while they're running the table and, have literally declared war on half the population of the United States. So I do support California redistricting, New York, potentially Illinois, Maryland, like wherever we can. Fair is fair, and this is bad for democracy. It is bad for giving people a voice in the political process, and we can't just sit back and hope things will go okay if we just play nice. They're not playing nice.
If you support nonpartisan redistricting, couldn't that mean a loss of blue seats in Oregon?
Potentially, and I'm fine with that. If we have nonpartisan redistricting across the country, we should have it here in Oregon. We should have ranked choice voting. We should overturn Citizens United and have less money in politics, more transparency. Absolutely. But again, you don't unilaterally disarm. And that is really where we're at. And I hope we can get past this and the American people will speak up and say, this needs to be about our country and not about our party.
This all comes to, we'll see how this all plays out leading into the 2026 midterm elections, which are going to be interesting. And we've already learned that you'll have a primary challenger in those.
Two so far.
Two. Oh, I have to do my research on that to find the other ones. I know one business owner in Eugene is joining the race. He called you out for your vote on tabling impeachment proceedings against Donald Trump and said that that's what pushed him to run. Are you concerned that there are people who say you're not liberal enough?
People say I'm not liberal enough. I was just down in Coos, Curry, and Douglas County, and they say I'm not conservative enough. So, look, I'm like a lot of people in this district. I come from a working class background. I have been working to lift up working people and making change for over 40 years through labor unions, through local groups, you know, whether it was working on school bond measures or helping people get elected or, you know, helping people get what they needed. I worked on the last immigration reform bill that went through Congress in the 80s. So fundamentally, I have been doing the work for a long time without a title, and I am committed to a robust democracy. So when people decide, they wake up and they say, I want to get engaged in the political process, because I think that's wonderful. And if he wins, that's great. If that's what the people want, I'm all for it. We do better when we have a robust democracy and when we have people speaking out. So I'm really glad that, you know, Mr. Weidenfeld, Needham rather, has come to the table and gotten involved in politics and organizing. Again, I've been doing it for nearly 45 years. I'm glad to see him showing up.
If the Democrats retake the House in 2026, what will Americans see change?
You'll have some checks and balances. You'll have votes that aren't just a loyalty test to a party, but rather focused on what's good for the American people. We don't do well when we don't have those kinds of checks and balances. And even within the Republican Party, because so many of their districts are gerrymandered to be hardcore red, right? So you're going to get the most extreme people. They will not break with what the president wants because it's a loyalty test, even though privately I will talk to them and they're like, yeah, I don't agree with this, but I can't do anything because I'll get primaried, or the president will call them out, or for whatever reason. Like Mike Johnson, in his budgeting, they don't even come to Democrats. They don't even pretend to engage us, even though we represent almost half the people and the voters in the United States. So fundamentally, what we will see is actual pushback. And I think that that's needed, and I think that's healthy for democracy. But you have a president who is literally telling states to redistrict because he doesn't want anyone to tell him no, and they know that the things that they have put forward are so vastly unpopular that they can't win a fair fight.
Well, we still got some time before the 2026 elections, so
yes,
we'll certainly dive a little deeper into that next year. But yeah, first having a rest of this month to maybe spend some time with family, and then back to work in September.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you so much.